Hey, Twitter's hard. It's okay.
Actually, the irony is that's one of the few mediums Loco hasn't fucked up on yet. He has on a low level because he did have to like fucking rein it in when he was going in on Monty one time. But aside from that, he actually hasn't been a bad boy on Twitter generally.
I've been a good boy in general. Like recently, I've been very much a good boy. Wait, where have I been a bad boy recently? Ever since like,
I mean, it's all subjective. Like I think you're all right, but you know, most of the comments and all the about our show about how you're useless and I'm just carrying you and I should just get a better co-host and you know. Wow. I didn't say them. It's not me who's present those opinions. I'm totally unrelated. I'm just the bearer of bad news.
I will admit I was clicking through VODs of Listen Loco and I was like, yeah, just like kind of want to like get like a sense. I'd like click through the VODs and every time I'd click, it was like Thorn was just talking about, so I clicked, so like, Thorn was talking. I was like, oh, where's Loco?
That's why it's called Listen Loco. It just listens. Yeah. Right. This is going to be episode 52 of Listen Loco. And this is an episode where cards on the table here, 52, perhaps in that sense, like a pack of cards. See what I did there, Loco? That's seamless. It's called a Segway, son, and that's not something that a security guy drives around on, unlike your fucked up part of the world. But anyway, 52, that's 52nd episode of Listen Loco. First of all, congratulations to us for doing 52 episodes in the, I think it was at the very end of the off season, and we've only just finished the first split now. Like MSI hasn't even, the main event hasn't even begun yet. We're already at 52 episodes, so I think pretty good job there. But you know, as they say in England, you've got to take the rough with the smooth. And the problem is, if you do 50 episodes, if you do 2 episodes a week religiously, not every episode can be super structured or with a big name guest every time, etc. So I told Loco in the off season, which I technically consider it off season when it's not the LCS, basically when it's not the splits, even though we've got MSI coming up now, unless it's going to be specifically about MSI. And personally, I don't care about MSI until it gets to the main event part anyway. I told him we should do some episodes which are not like topical. Like it doesn't have to be this week, what happened this week, or it doesn't have to be what's going to happen with this team that's going on now. So one of those is obviously going to be this episode because the guest that Loco's invited is Blastoise, who works for Riot he said something like in the data collection part of Riot or something along those lines within the balance team, right?
I thought he was a janitor.
Thank you. Also, that was just a long intro to say this is like your discount, like budgeted stream, and I'm like, yeah, we got this guy last minute. Cool, thanks. Wow, I feel really welcome.
See, he says that like it's a joke. He obviously doesn't know me very well, Loco. That was entirely genuine, everything I just said. So I was actually going to lead into exactly what he just said, which is this. So really what this is, guys, is another episode where even though it's like the off season, so you'd think it was like downtime, we're all chilling. Really, it's just where Loco just goes like, throws me like a fucking potato and goes, can you just make like the Taj Mahal out of this, please, or something like, oh, fucking hell, well, I'll just go to work then, chat, with no fucking props or tools whatsoever. So go on then, Loco, give us the premise, homie. What was the concept behind this show? Like, what kinds of topics did you want us to talk with Blastoise about here? Like, where were you thinking about when you set this show up?
So Blast actually has...
The problem is it's almost too wide how many topics we could do. So what were you thinking of?
So Blast actually works in the department where it has a lot to do with pro play somewhat, regional difference between pro play, what ideal pro play looks like, what League of Legends should look like going forward, and also he did a talk at GDC. As much as I shit on Blau, he's actually someone that's kind of smart, so there's a lot of different topics that we can hit.
Yeah, okay. I think one that could be interesting, partly because I was listening to your guys's what was the one with Papa Smithy where you guys talked about like what even is the structure of like what is League of Legends today versus like the Vision meta previously, and like I think there's actually a lot to talk about from the, like you guys often come at stuff from like the esports angle. How do we reconcile that with maybe like the business angle for a company like Riot, Blizzard, Epic? Like how do they think about their games as sports next year, right? Like season 10 of League of Legends. How do we think about League of Legends in 5 years, right? Because we're getting to that point where there's longevity now in a lot of esports titles, and a good amount of my job rather is thinking somewhat about that long-term strategy. So I'll preface with that.
I'm just going to go ahead and say at the beginning of the episode that I am not beholden to anyone except myself and my own opinions. So as a result, I'm just going to go ahead and say, if this guy just constantly defends the position Riot's taken or like explains why everything they did was like had a logic and was all right, like we're definitely going to chop that straight down. But he's welcome to give his own opinions in that sense. If he chooses to align them with Riot Games, so be it. If he has his own opinion, I would just say this generally to make it an interesting discussion. Just argue the merits of points. Let's not argue on the level of like, well, this did work because look, it made the game great. Like there's no basically every opinion we discuss. There should be like a falsifiable case. Like there's no point being like, well, this is what made the game successful. No one knows because you didn't run a control group game separately, which was super hard and hardcore. So I'm just saying that at the beginning because otherwise people watching the episode are going to think exactly what I just said. Like, oh, is this just going to be the Riot version of everything? And like every decision they made was right. So the reason why I actually also think it's worthless to have that position of like the right answer is because look how much League of Legends has changed over the years. They've tried all different permutations seemingly. So at certain points in time, their philosophy would actually have been countered to what it is now regardless. Could even be the same person if you go back a few years. So let's start roughly there, right? So one of the things you basically set up the context for is, obviously when we address the game, right? I always say this to people. One of the reasons why I actually find it very telling that most, I was actually joking with Loco about this before the show began, but one of the reasons why it's very telling that most scandals, especially in our space, esports, tend to come from Twitter is because Twitter contains the least information. It only contains the words. You have no clue what like that person's expression was. You can't read any of the data around. You can't even hear the tone in their voice, where they say it sarcastically, where they say it very harshly. You can't obviously know anything aside from that one tweet. Yeah, you can tag tweets together now and you can chain them, but generally it's just one thought, you know. It's not like I'm doing right here where I'm setting up what I'm about to say with all the context, etc. So the point I'm getting to here is, really, when we discuss on this show, balanced concepts, how we want the game to be, there would really be, if we were describing it to someone who didn't know esports, a million square brackets that are like, in the context of esports and the highest competitive level and the meta, you know, there would be a million like caveats to everything we say. So one of the things, let's start with that topic then, the idea of like, when you balance or create elements in a game, you aren't just creating it for the esports side. And you set it up there, like that you have to sort of like play to the business side as well, because obviously that is what sells the game. So start us off there. Like, how does that inform this aspect in terms of like how the game's designed? Because a lot of people cynically, Blastoise, would just say they think most of it is just balanced for random people that play the game, not esports people.
Yeah. Okay. So I will say two things. I do want to briefly agree with you that anything I say here, I agree. I should not be able to be like, I'm not allowed to use, secret data that I can't reveal. Okay. So everything I discuss, I agree. It should be falsifiable. I should have to claim it. Secondly, I think that actually makes it a lot easier for me to speak more candidly. And we caveat this right now, this is my opinion.
Sure.
This is not Riot's opinion, because then I get to be more frank. I'll feel more comfortable discussing some of this stuff. And obviously I know you're not going to fully separate it from Riot's opinion because I do work there. So it's not fair to fully separate.
You can also just, if there ever is a key distinction, you can just say something like, personally, I would have it that way, but actually they do it this reason at Riot. You can also do like that if you want to cover all bases.
Right. And so to caveat on a totally separate note, I'll do a brief example. I am someone where, and I look at both Riot's like player behavior system and Overwatch's player behavior system, and player behavior systems in a bunch of games, totally unrelated to esports. I'm someone who I generally don't like banning accounts. I think it causes all sorts of issues for other reasons. So
he's starting strong here, guys. He really is a little bit of a different thinker than the usual Riot mob, right? Yeah, well done. You're starting to win me over a little bit. Come on.
Oh, and by the way, and someone's gonna be like, oh, he's only saying this because Thorn's here. Literally, look at any of my VODs on my stream. Loco knows I've said this before. I've always said, like, listen, if someone types something in chat, you take away their ability to chat. That's your punishment. Yeah, in fact, I would actually be appropriate. I would be harsher than I would even be a more harsh version of Riot's player behavior when it comes to chat. And I would take people's chat away for even more things. You talk, spicy shit, cool. You lose your ability to chat for a week, for a month, for the entire season, whatever. But I wouldn't ban your account. I ban your account if you are account fraud, cheating, intentionally feeding games. That's what you disrupt the game experience. You lose the game experience. You disrupt the chat. You lose the chat. That's my personal opinion. It's not Riot's. Moving on. Cool. On the all right. So thinking about League for both the pro players and the normal players, we do have to actually kind of consider both, right? Because at the end of the day, if we ruin the game for like our pro players, I mean, we're sort of seeing this. I mean, I'm not trying to like throw Epic under the rug, but Epic's kind of getting really blasted for that recently. You guys saw the what was the collegiate clip where the two dudes won the collegiate tournament, and immediately we're just like, yeah, we're done playing this game. Like Epic's not balancing it right, like whatever. I feel like it when, and I'm even saying if we screw it up for pro players, I'm saying when we screw it up for pro players, because we have in the past, we get blasted pretty hard. I'm thinking about Juggernaut patch.
Yes.
I'm thinking about
Funnel.
I mean, even recently 8-11, right? We got blasted for that. And a lot of our considerations, I'll even be frank, the balanced team literally looks at, they have criteria for whether or not they will make changes for pro play and criteria for whether or not they'll make changes for other parts of our play.
Okay.
So it is something we consider. One of the things that I think that would be a good topic to discuss here is like, how much should we focus on one versus the other? I have a feeling, Thorin, you're more on the side that you should always balance for the highest level and then let it go down, right? Is that?
Well, let's get into this topic actually then, because obviously there's a lot that can be said about it. So the main problem is it depends what you think esports is. And so when I say that, when I began in esports, I always thought, first of all, there was no esports. Obviously, it was just Quake. And that was the game that were people playing. And that's basically like what spawned the Western esports scene, because the same companies that did the tournaments for Quake then did the companies for the games for Counter-Strike. They sort of, their first cynical move really was sort of in many ways the birth of esports. It was like taking other games into tournament circuits. And so when this initially happened, think about the order of what's happening there. You haven't had some sort of scenario where it's like someone took control of a game and then steered it down this very careful path where it kept sort of going through check marks, you know, think of it like almost like a toll system. And then eventually it got to a point where it could succeed and be a phenomenon. Really, it was actually the fact that it was a hardcore game. The people who liked it really liked it, and they really liked the fact that Quake was a very hardcore game. And so they weren't just playing it for fun online and then going off to bed. They were playing it, and then they were thinking, this is more than just a game. You know, this is a sport. Like the best players, it's so hard that to be the best player. Of course, you'd want to watch the best player because he's going to be so much better than you are at a game with such an ability to display skill. That the two components to it being a sport is, one, it's so high level that even people who were playing for nothing were playing as though they were like a professional. Like, I want to be the best. I want to learn the new thing. And then crucially, what made the rest of us play, aside from the fact, yes, the game had a fun aspect in the everyday experience, was also aspirational. It was the idea of like, well, I want to be one of the best players. I want to be better. I want to compete and climb up that ladder. Now, that is a totally alien world to the esports world I now live in. 20 years later, basically, where if you look at the current esports world, it's the opposite. What happens is a company has a game that does well enough in the casual market that they start to build out the esports side. Like you're saying with Fortnite, obviously it began as just a public game, you know, everyone was playing it for fun. And then it got such a big amount of attention. They were like, right, let's throw some esports stuff in there. You know, sponsors come in. That's like the opposite. So in that scenario, I will fully acknowledge that a lot of what I would do to a game to make it really good only works in a world like the old world I came from, that I'm to some degrees a relic of, which I still think could work, but it'd have to be an amazing game, because this would have to be a game that'd be so amazing people would just be drawn to it, even if it was very hard. But the point I'm getting to here basically is, since the other esports games weren't built that way, I don't think you can actually be 100% one way or the other. Like, even though I am a purist, I don't think you can be a purist with a game like League of Legends, because there would be no League of Legends if you were a purist. Like, if you were a purist, I can already tell you didn't play League of Legends, because League of Legends came out the exact same time as like fucking like Avalon Heroes, fucking obviously Heroes of New Earth was the one that all the Dota guys migrate to, not League of Legends. So to me, it's almost like torturous to then claim that Riot should do everything in a hardcore manner, because they probably wouldn't have a game right now. We wouldn't have success. So I'm willing to temper my opinion somewhat, but in doing so, I will say I have a hard time with the perspectives. Why I want to get your thoughts, both of you, on this one is, I think sometimes people take the angle of like the business side has to succeed, and they go too cynical with it, in my opinion. They start to think that like you have to dumb it down as much as possible, and everything has to be as lowest common denominator is the term you'd use, because the notion is that would hit the most people, right? Whereas all I'll say in closing is I think you can marry the two concepts together. So for example, the reason why I actually find it quite cool that even though I consider myself someone who's, I've watched a lot of movies in my life, I would consider myself like a cinephile, you know, someone who like reveres cinema and great movies, but I have no problem telling someone that I love Christopher Nolan movies. Now they might go, oh, aren't those some of the, you know, best-selling movies of all time? It's like, yeah, but that's what's great, is he actually killed the commercial side while in the majority of his projects keeping the artistic element almost entirely intact. He just did it in such a clever, seamless manner that somehow he married the two together in a way that, yeah, a lot of people can't. You know, you get like art house movies and you get the popcorn thriller, and those are very much on a different spectrum of how much they sell. So let's get into this topic then. Like, Loco, where do you come down on this? Like, when you look at the game, do you actually make yourself think like, well, you know, even if as a pro player I would want this, could you implement this for casual players? Could you implement it for the iron player out there?
The pro play, like balancing for pro play and for public is so different and difficult, because like pro play is like 0.0001% of the player base, while it's like 90% to 80% of watched League of Legends. Or actually, it would probably be lower percentage with how big streamers are nowadays. So while pro play is a very small...
but streamers are also I mean, it's solo queue, it's high elo solo queue, but I mean, still they're also playing at a higher level.
It's still casual play, sure.
So
yeah,
I actually think Fortnite was a great example that you guys brought up. Like, if you're 2 base round casual and 2 base round like keeping the game exciting and not so much about competitive integrity, then you get Fortnite esports. But if you're way too hardcore, then you might be way too elitist and way too high barrier of entry, like maybe like Dota 2, maybe CSGO, games that are extremely hard to get into. So I understand the two problems and like the two sides at war with it, and I think Riot found a good balance. There is off cases like Rise or Azir that become extremely hard to balance, but generally I like the direction where Riot has gone. If something is too extreme for pro play, they tone it down while they're trying to make the lower tier champions always viable. So I actually have no problems with the general direction of balance that Riot has gone, other than like few case examples, but the general direction I think has been spot on.
And one thing I think I could offer is like maybe like a little, I liked how Thorn, I liked how you referenced Christopher Nolan, the like, hey, he had broad like mass appeal, like tons of sales, and he kept the artistic depth. It's weird. This was in the GDC talk. It's actually about champion engagement, the concept of breadth versus depth. But again, you can apply this concept to other things as well. I think we could frame that also for looking at esports, right? Like, what are the esports that are really broad? Like, they have broad appeal. Tons of people play the game. They monetize in the game. And they also have that depth, that interesting high level play as well. And maintain that versus, you know, so I think maybe we'd look at Fortnite right now and we'd say, oh, Fortnite clearly has incredible breadth, tons of people playing, tons of interest, but the depth at the competitive level is maybe lacking. Whereas
you could even also say, by the way, that this is something I've often made the point of. Like, I don't consider myself a prophet for being one of the early on people who said Fortnite as a big esports game will never be like CS and League of Legends, because of exactly this reason. Is, to me, the whole selling point of Fortnite is anyone of any age could jump in and instantly start playing and have fun that moment. Like, the game's pretty much tailored to not have to have insane depth. It's for everyone. It is. Yeah. Whereas, like, the whole point is something that's going to be an esport, it's always going to on some level be more niche, especially the competitive side of it, crucially, whatever you show as the esport. Whereas the problem Fortnite had was it wanted to mirror the casual experience even in the esport side.
Well, yeah, and you can't just jump into a game of CSGO or League and know what the fuck you're doing, right? And I think there's also something else to be said here, which is it's going to get a little complicated, because I think we're also talking about the level at which you play the games. And I actually think there's another component of breadth versus depth, which is the broadcast of the games. I think CSGO is very niche and hard to get into as a player. I think it's really tough. I do think it's actually a very accessible esport. I think if you like esports, it is actually like, I do not play CSGO. I watch CSGO esports and can appreciate it. I played a ton of Overwatch. I still have trouble following Overwatch esports.
Sure.
And I think something about the way in which CSGO is broadcast also gives it a broad appeal. I almost think of it kind of like American football or like even American hockey are good examples. Like, they're really hard to get into as sports, but the actual spectator experience of them is really good. So I think we can draw parallels to other sports. What I'd be curious about, though, is where do you guys think, like, so for League of Legends, where has League gone like too far into the like dumbing down for casual players?
I mean, how much fucking time have we got here? Let's get started, Loco. We haven't got long here, mate. 2 hours.
Well, because let me just quickly jump in with one thought, which is that sometimes I think you can make the game more accessible for players without removing that depth. And I actually think like the elemental dragons that we put into the game, granted, I think they need some work as an objective, but I think that was one area where we did add a little bit of more clarity into the game. Like it was easier for lower level players to understand, oh, like, yeah, fire, I get damage, water, I get healing. It was dumbed down in that sense.
It's more intuitive.
Yeah, it's more intuitive, but the pro players could still play around it strategically. I think a better example is actually the jungle plants, where we removed all the smite buffs. I would argue were one of the most obscure designs in the game. I think only high elo and pro players understood all the smite buffs, and a lot of them probably really liked it. I think we implemented jungle plants. You could argue we dumbed down the game. And in a lot of ways, I think with League holistically, a lot of the systems we can afford to dumb down because so much of the depth and complexity in League comes from champions and comes from champion compositions.
And also interaction between the champions, like your champions versus their champions.
Exactly, right? And I think there's areas of this that other games can learn from as well. But I mean, I'm not going to... I'd probably agree there are parts where we maybe have dumbed it down too much. So I want your examples, Thorn. Hit me. Let's do it.
Thorn, go first.
Because
I actually am not that much problematic with the game being dumbed down. I have other problems that I want to address. So go give your dumbed down examples.
As I would say, as a general trend, I hate anything that's added into the game. I actually think the jungle plants are a good example that essentially makes it mildly easier as a game. So, for example, one thing I don't like about additions like the jungle plants is, in theory, it means in the middle of skirmishes, the skirmish can just stop for no reason. I just had the plant, you didn't. I used it first. There we go, I'm away. And then it's the end of the fight. Like, in that scenario, one of the concepts to me of League of Legends, which is actually one of the best selling points, is that it has a fog of war, and that the fog of war is very significant because it depends on who can interact with what lane and where you are, etc. So if I get caught, I get caught. That's it. Like, I'll tell you another thing I fucking hate. I fucking hate the stopwatches as well. Same thing. When I watch, as someone who's watched a lot of League of Legends, I still always have to, in my brain, go like, oh shit, they've caught. Oh no, wait, he's got stopwatch. Never mind. Actually, just fire on that one. Like that. Just like, to me, that's like. I know some people would call it counterplay. That's like anti-play to me. It's like you're just stopping things happening. So these are like very, very broad topics, obviously. But these are like, if you notice, it's that general trend that anytime you make something like a little bit more forgiving or it's not as punishing, same concept, but, different way to phrase it depending on how people react to that. I'm generally against that. Like, I want things to be as difficult as they can be. Overall, obviously not to some ridiculous level where you have to do a 15-button combo to do a simple move. Sure, we're not going that far.
So it's actually interesting. I agree with your point about stopwatches, but I disagree that it makes the game easier. In fact, if anything, I think stopwatches make the game harder, and in a way that's not does what you. Yeah, the outcome of what stopwatches do, I agree with you, and I don't like that. The inputs and how you access that power stopwatches actually makes the game harder. And I think it's partly
very skill expressive.
Right, when you're loading into the game, you have the champions on your team and your champion, and you understand the state of the game, and you understand a lot of things about the game. Cool. You know all the champion abilities, etc. like that. What stopwatch does is stopwatch requires you to have pressed tab, and especially because stopwatch is not something that you get right at the start. It's the commencing stopwatch. So you have to check to see what time it is in the game. Do they have it up now? So in a way, I actually think stopwatch makes the game harder. You have to be checking tab. You have to understand the items of the other champions. You have to understand your own CC. You have to think about when they might use their stopwatch. If you even check the time to see if they have stopwatch. And I actually agree, though, that it's still bad, though.
It's tedious. That's the problem with it, Blau. Like, why do I need to check that if you have stopwatch or not? Why doesn't that show on UI? Like, why does a commencing stopwatch look the same as it does before 10 minutes and after 10 minutes? It is strictly a different item. Before 10 minutes, it is not an active item. It is just something that's filling your slot. It should look different, and at 10 minutes, people with stopwatch, they should have a small animation that tells you like, hey, his stopwatch like commenced. Like, there's problem with clarity with the stopwatch. I think stopwatch is skill expressive, and I like that it's in the game. My problems are with the tediousness of it and the unclarity of it.
Yeah, and someone like there's somebody in your chat like, oh, like knowing the game and pressing tab, that's not that like hard. No, it actually does add. It adds what I would call mind share, right? Like in this game where you are tracking,
it adds a strategical element because it's more information, you know,
right,
more decisions to make. Sure.
And the thing is, I agree though with Thorin though that what it actually does to the game is not good. And where I like the sort of mind share for people to be thinking about the game of League of Legends and the difficulty of League of Legends should fundamentally, in my mind, come from the champion. It should come from the champions on your team and the champions on the other team. We have so many fucking champions in the game that's where the depth of the game comes from. Oftentimes when we add in systems that require you to like, you know, think about some other element of the game, like stopwatch there, I don't. And again, obviously those things should still matter. Did they proc conquer? Is there electrocute backup? There's a varying degree of other systems that should occur. That adds to the complexity, that makes the game hard, and that separates the best players from the worst. I think the difference is the amount of power in stopwatch for it being a non-champion related thing is too much, right? So I'd actually agree as stopwatch's example. And that's honestly why I think we nerfed stopwatch. God, do you guys remember fucking League of Stopwatch at the beginning of
6-minute stopwatches? Yeah.
Yeah, it was like the fucking like in pro play, everyone was just fucking popping stopwatch over and over in fights. Sure. It became League of Stopwatches. What's interesting is when we originally did Runes Reforged, when we like redid the rune system, we had more power in the keystones, in things like Electrocute, Dark Hearts. I mean, there was one at the time called Reap, which was basically if you got someone to below 10% health, it just executed them. Yeah, that was we ran that with Pro Player Labs, and I think it was like Froggen versus Huhi in the mid lane. We had pros come in and test it, and they both played Karthus, and everyone.
But yeah, sure.
Right. It was basically like
you had them play Karthus against each other. Froggen versus.
It was
Huhi.
they did Karthus versus Karthus mirror match, and everyone just became pawns in their game because like one of them would ult and it'd get everyone
became a pawn. Yeah.
Oh, okay. And then get everyone low and then just execute everyone on the other team, but then also execute the Karthus, and then the Karthus would ult on the other team that just died and just kill everyone on the other team, and it was like disgusting. But one of the piece of feedback we got was, hey, the game became about League of Runes, not League of Legends. League of Legends is in the Legends. The champions are the things that you play and should be the focal point of the game. So where I'm okay and I guess dumbing down the game is in thinking about certain systems in the game and like removing some of the like obscure complexity in them. That's why I think about like the smite rewards on camps as something where we did that. But I do agree on stopwatches, Thorin, but for a different reason.
Like another thing, since we touched on it there, that I'll bring up is one area that I actually think you will always find problems in any team game with. This is after playing a lot of different esports games over the years. And unfortunately, I think it's something that basically you almost can't balance properly is like, for example, stopwatch is a great example. It's the difference between one player playing the game, having his own single player experience where, yes, he has 4 teammates, but he isn't necessarily on voice comms with them. He doesn't necessarily communicate in depth with them. You know, he plays like a solo queue game where you play semi-selfishly, you play semi for the team when you have a chance for things to work. And it's a mixture of a single player experience with a team experience with the multiplayer aspect. You've got all of it combined, right? And in this scenario, the problem I always find is how do these things interact when it's actually a team, when you actually have the mind? So obviously the difference is in a solo queue game, we're not all going to activate our stopwatches perfectly and correctly, like navigate an amazing team fight in the same way that a team who was amazing would destroy us. Like the best example ever I'll give you quickly is this happens all the time in CSGO when they try to balance weapons. So a very quick example I'll give you is one of the things they made different about CSGO than past versions of Counter-Strike is they made a lot of different pistols that you can buy, and they purposely made the pistols that are slightly more expensive than the starting pistols so that like they're more expensive, but they're way better than any pistol in the old versions of Counter-Strike was. Like if you get like a CZ75 or something like this, like you can literally just kill an opponent that has full body armor, a gun. Yes, you have to headshot him once or twice, but you know, like in this scenario, you can even the odds admittedly with a much more limited weapon. Well, the problem that they have always had with balancing those specific weapons is that, again, if I play matchmaking and I don't know my teammates, and I definitely don't know how they think and how they're going to play, and so our team play is very limited. It's sort of like me seeing someone on my screen roughly interacting with, and maybe saying something on the mic, but I can't know that he's going to respond. Well, the problem is, in that scenario, if you balance the gun for how I will use it on my own in matchmaking, you will leave the weapon so that it doesn't seem that strong to me. But then when a team of 5 people who all decide, right, well, 3 of us are going to round down this corner and you're going to bait him out, and then 3 of us are going to be waiting there. Like, when they use coordination, it can make the weapon overpowered. That actually technically isn't overpowered. In isolation, 1 gun versus 1 gun, it's at a good state. But when team aspects come in, it becomes massively overpowered. So I don't even blame the developers for that one. That is a very, very tough area. I personally think that is almost impossible to properly balance for, because you're going to have to skew it one way or the other.
I think that is, and that's actually going to be probably one of the meatier topics we go into, because Loco and I have discussed this before. So many of our champion kits rely on coordination, or not rely, are greatly benefited by coordination. Things like Kallista's ult, Galio ult, Shen ult, any of the globals are so much more powerful.
Not even just
champion. Teleport even as a spell, right? Yeah, just so much more powerful, because it's not only that you have. So there's one thing that I would pitch for Riot. I'd like to see us do eventually.
Voice comms.
I'd like us to do voice comms in ranked, like opt-in voice comms for ranked. Presumably that means Galio is a more effective champion than in ranked, because you can actually tell your teammate when you're ulting on them. I would like that, but I still don't think it'll solve all the issues. Not everyone's going to be on voice comms. Not everyone also understands the game and knows how to execute on those globals at the same level that a pro player does. One of the
Wow, let me comment on that real quick. Riot has said one of the reasons they host Riot Rumble, the internal Riot tournament, is that's how they want League of Legends to be played, with a group of people all communicating with each other. If that is Riot's ideal way of League of Legends being played, the fact that voice comm doesn't exist is directly contrasting Riot's own philosophy about how they want League of Legends to be played.
Here's the real problem, Loco. I'm going to address it right now, because you'll never hear actual head Riot people say this, but think about it logically. Actually Blastoise differentiated himself from Riot as a collective in that he wasn't a huge fan of, banning someone from being able to play the game because they said mean things in the text chat, right? Well, the problem is, there's not going to be an AI bot that can hear that you said the N-word and immediately ban you in the same way as you could with a script. There's not going to be something that can easily pass voice communication. So the whole toxicity aspect, which if it's a different company, we can have this discussion, but Riot has made its point pretty clear on where it feels about toxicity and these concepts and how it wants to apply them to the community. Well, the problem is you're going to have a really hard time if every single game, some 3 idiots in the game are telling you have to review the whole voice recording and then hear what people said. If there's no voice recording, well, that whole idea of we're going to battle toxicity is out of the window. Because if you know how it works in Counter-Strike, etc., nobody's listening. Come on. And nobody's recording it either. Whatever you say on voice, you say on voice. So unfortunately, since they've built an atmosphere in League of Legends where fans feel entitled to the idea of people shouldn't be allowed to type mean things to me. Well, God forbid you literally open a mic to their ears. Now, I don't have a problem with that, because you can mute. I do it in Counter-Strike all the time. Half the time I don't even play with voice comms on. But we all know you could mute the text from years ago and people weren't doing that. So I think that's half the problem. Because even though we can get into lots of the, again, competitive advantages of voice comms, the problem I have is I don't see how Riot's going to overcome that stumbling block, which is how do they police the whole toxicity aspect if they have voice comms?
I think voice comms should be a privilege. And if you're going to abuse your privilege, have it taken away, and it should be.
Yeah, but it's going to be a lot of hours people having to sit and listen. You can scroll through a chat pretty long.
All right. Let me pitch this. Okay. All right, watch. All right, here's what you do. You turn on voice in pubs, so in ranked, you keep it on, and then what happens is it's opt-in voice. You're in voice, and then we add a report at the end of the game, which is hey, this dude was an asshole in voice. And you know what? We just kind of no one reviews it. No one reviews, but if enough people reported you for voice, you lose the voice chat for a bit, right? Basically you give some people a way to report it, and then you just tune it to whatever degree you want it to. So yeah, are you going to get false positives? Sure. But again, in this new system, we're also not banning people. So,
okay.
So again, it's like this. Maybe someone didn't say the N word. Maybe they're just cussing
That's
their
an
teammates
extreme
out.
example, obviously, sure.
Right. Maybe someone's just like, I fuck you guys. Why, piece of shit jungler. Why don't you gank my lane? Which, yeah, sometimes that's fair. So someone says that, right? And their team, and they probably performed bad that game, a little bit bad too. And so the whole team's like, yeah, fuck it, just report that guy for voice. Worst case scenario, he said some things that probably shouldn't have gotten his voice chat taken away, and he loses it for a week, right? Like, that's sort of an easy. And then here's another thing. If you really want to tie it into a system that we already have, is then you just tie it into the honor system, and you say, hey, you have to be honor level 2 to even use voice comms. So because the other case people talk about is, well, what about the people who aren't in voice chat? What if you flame them, right? So say there's four people in voice chat and one person's not, and they're all typing like, you fucking idiot, why aren't you in voice? Fuck this person, right? Like, they type that out, they're going to lose their honor because they're going to get chat restricted, but their account's not going to be banned. And then they don't have the honor, and then they can't use voice until they build their honor.
Wait.
And that's like a simple, low-cost way of doing it.
The big problem with like the system you're mentioning, and I think it stems
There's
from...
no problem with it. It's a perfect system because I designed it. I'm not a designer. Don't ever implement this system. But
the problem that stems with League of Legends is what happens to toxic players. They get their account banned. And people talk about, I have 7 different accounts. I have 8 different accounts, dude. Like, go fuck yourself. Like, why is there no 2-factor in League of Legends? Like, if you get your account banned, then that should take away your ability to play their game. And, like, you guys don't...
By the way, just for anyone who doesn't appreciate this, remember Locodoco is actually ethnically Korean, a country where you are literally required to use your social security ID to play a free video game, and where the government tells you through your video game at midnight to please stop playing the video game because you are underage. Like, this is a sort of Orwellian nightmare Loco thinks is like every day. So he is now literally suggesting to Riot staff to make it so you have to use your mobile phone to verify your account.
I think
so you
multi-account
can't
is
avoid
terrible.
their bullshit fucking bans and actually keep playing that video game that, again, is just a game.
Wait, Dorian, you think it's fine that people
okay,
make
wait,
multiple accounts?
whoa.
Wait.
Also, wait, no, time out. You can't do this. You can't come in here and say, oh, no, you can't just no, I'm going to call you out, Thorn. You can't just say only just a game. You made your career on this. It's esports to you. Of all people, you should not just be like, it's only a game. Like, come on.
Dorian, you think it's fine for people to... Okay, go ahead first, Blau.
But for what it's worth, you can't just say it's only a game. For what it's worth...
The experience of playing the game League of Legends is literally only a game. Like, nothing that ever happens inside a game of League of Legends will like make me feel traumatized or like vulnerable or emotionally beaten down or bullied or harassed. Like, the worst
then
scenario.
Then you're not passionate enough about the game.
I mean, that's one thing.
No, I'm actually genuinely being serious. I think if you look at a lot of the high elo players who dedicate their time to this game, it becomes a sport for them, right? I get the idea of something being a game versus not a game. But one of the big things that we have to recognize for games like CSGO, for League of Legends, for Dota, is that they are more than a game. They are a sport going forward. And that's actually something I do want to talk about. Let's get to this later. They are different than The Last of Us. They are different than Mass Effect. Those are experiences. That's more akin to a movie. I'm going to be honest. When I play League of Legends, I play men's league hockey out in LA. It's great. Justin Bieber plays in a similar league to me, actually.
What does that have to do with anything? But go ahead.
It does have something to do with it.
You would mention it yourself, Loco, if it was true. So
I would, but go ahead.
It's true. Hey, kid's pretty good. Canadian. I played hockey back in the day, and it's a sport that I continue to play. I'm invested in it. When I get pissed playing hockey, I've had games where I was fucking pissed, smashed my stick into the boards, fucking, chirping at boys. I was upset. Like, people get emotionally invested because it's something they've invested a lot of time in. It's something that they work to improve at, right? Same way as people invest a lot of time in chess, in golf, in rock climbing, in basketball, right? I think League of Legends, CSGO, and Dota are closer to those. For a lot of people, not for everyone. Sure, a lot of people play them just as games. A lot of people play them as sports, though.
That's interesting you would say that, because the problem there, right, is what you've just made a great argument for is Riot treating people who are professional players very, very differently when they play solo queue from how they treat normal players. In fact, they shouldn't just give out uniform bans to people who are professional players, because as you say, it's more than a game to them. It's their life, it's their craft, it's their passion. It's literally what they give all their waking hours to. And when they're playing in solo queue and they get auto-filled and someone doesn't play their role and trolls them, know what? They're literally having their practice hours taken away. They're having their livelihood impacted. They're having their job satisfaction ruined. And so that person, if he was to lash out in a frustrated manner, should be treated with a lot more compassion by someone at Riot Games than a random person just playing solo queue who's just a scrub. But of course, we know that's literally the opposite of Riot's position. They treat every summoner on the Rift as though he's another identical person, don't they? And that's why we've had pro players banned for years and many other occasions. So your own argument would be great. Just bottle it up, like tape that, and then just go with a boombox. Play it tomorrow in the office. Maybe we can actually affect some change.
You can't take what I say though. That applies.
I just did it. Just did it. Keep watching.
I don't. Wait, Blau. Let
you
me.
said
Let me
at the beginning that I got to express my view.
Yeah, you did.
Okay.
Wait, Blau.
Okay.
Without what is it? I do think Doran can't just take your opinion and then be like, if this is your opinion, then why does Riot do this? Because you are not Riot. You're an employee at Riot with your voice, and that might not even be the department you work
I
at.
definitely was not saying, by the way, he had to agree with my opinion. What I was saying was his own opinion. I was pointing out an interesting observation that his own opinion actually goes counter to what the company
that's fine, because he's an
tends
employee.
to display in how they think about
He's
things.
not. He's not the ultimate decision maker.
That's Loco.
That's
you're
fair.
allowed. I don't know if you have, like, overnight you became a member of Antifa or something, Loco, but you're actually entirely allowed to say something that you don't agree with someone without it being prescriptive behavior that they now must stop saying it. No, he is welcome to disagree with what I've said. The conversation continues. It doesn't matter that I'm not saying that Riot has to change it. I'm saying that Riot isn't going to change it. So what he's saying now is all well and good. It's lovely and flowery language, but it doesn't actually apply to how Riot treats people.
Let me put in my 2 cents. Let me put in my 2 cents first, Blau.
Okay.
I
Go
do
ahead.
think, what is it, high elo solo queue, like absolute high elo, like Challenger Master, should be policed way differently than 99% of League of Legends and solo queue. I agree with your point that it is competitive, it is sport, it is practice hours, and I agree with Doran's point. Like, you're actively ruining someone's practice, and as a coach and someone that worked in the competitive scene, it is a fucking nightmare to tell players to play solo queue. And when they tell me like it's fucking trash, it's not worth my time, I have to go with the angle of you still have to get the best out of it. Like, that is your job as a professional player, but solo queue at high elo in North America is an absolute terrible experience, and it should be policed differently than 99% of like solo queue.
Yeah. So I'll just say this. I don't work on this team, but part of this is like, and I can apply this not just to, but to like Overwatch or even to CS:GO, because they actually probably run into similar issues.
This guy knows a lot of games, Loco. The thing is, I'm just, you know, what if I ever get as passionate as him about esports, I might actually start a little career or something.
You should learn.
You know,
You should learn about CS:GO.
Yeah. I'll see if I can. Yeah, I'm learning a lot. Anyway, keep going. Go and tell us more.
Yeah, I heard you know some stuff about. Remind me to talk about how you're like the Kanye West of esports later on. But anyways, I think if you could have systems that were more tailored to the motivations of players playing a given mode, that actually would be ideal. So you brought this up, which is like, hey, in high elo, no one really cares what you type. They really don't care. They pretty much only care about how you play, and I think they're okay.
You could even make an argument, by the way, as a quick aside, that if you know what most top competitive players are like, where really they don't get that bothered by like what's typed, they'd rather, like, put it this way, if you could say to a top pro player, everyone in your game who flames, they might say anything outrageous in flame, but we promise they'll still play properly, they'll still try and win on your team. Every single high elo streamer would be like, that's fine, actually. Like,
I'll take it. Yeah.
As long as they don't int the game, as they can type any stupid shit they want. But the problem is, this is a quick aside, I'd even argue that having such like a scrutinized chat system at the top end even is actually counter effective, because I actually think at the top end they all use it to fuck each other over, like, he was being toxic, so fuck him, let's all report. Like, they actually, I know, for example, some of the famous incidents in Europe, players were like that, like people like Forgiven, Nuke Duck. What would happen was, yes, they were more aggressive in chat than the other average pro, but half of it was the pros that didn't like them would just be like, oh, fuck this guy, let's all just report him. And like, they had a bad culture in that sense. So I'd even just put as an aside, that's another point probably in favor of a different type of thing, with someone who knows what pro scene's like, and they maybe have a different expectation as to what's reasonable.
Yeah, meanwhile, if someone's playing a normals game or an ARAM, if you're in a normals game and you're like, hey, I'm gonna go ADC or like Janna mid, like AD Janna mid, you're in normals, that's fine.
Should
like,
be allowed. Yeah,
that's okay. Yeah, if you did that in challenger play, you should that should be reportable, right? Those are different, and you're still playing Summoner's Rift, still League of Legends, but those are fundamentally different situations. But I'd say this: if you're playing a normals game or an ARAM and you tell someone like, fuck you, KYS, uninstall the game, that's very different in a normals or an ARAM than in the highest level. So yeah, I think in League or in any of these games, I think the next step for teams like any designers or developers, this isn't just for Riot, I think other developers and designers should be thinking about this too. They should be thinking about the motivations of the person who plays a couple ARAMs a day, the person who's like, casually playing Summoner's Rift normals, casually playing Overwatch, versus the motivations and the frustrations of the person who's playing at the highest level, right? Because you probably do need to tailor those experiences. And again, that's like, it's a tough call. Some developers might listen to that. I'd like Riot to eventually move in that direction. That would be my hope. But I'm focusing on other stuff right now. That's how I just dodge that one.
Well, can I ask about a huge problem with the game that I see year to year that's actually a continuation that Riot hasn't stopped in? Because I'm in general favor of usually what Riot has made for the changes, and I think the game has gotten better over the years.
I PayPal you every week, so say good stuff about us. All right, let's hear. But let's hear the thing that I fed to you.
I genuinely think the game's been getting better over the years, not worse and worse and worse.
By the way, just as an aside, I'm going to give people, it's crucial to always give that key piece of context that explains what someone's talking about. So as Loco says what he's about to say, I hope he can fully articulate himself here. He's someone who still thinks Game of Thrones is good and likes the new Star Wars.
Oh my God.
Right, go ahead, Loco. Continue. Tell us again about how Riot generally made the right changes. Like, who are you, Billy fucking suck the status quo's dick? What are you talking about? Keep going anyway.
Wait, Doran, if you disagree, then let's talk about it. Where do you think Riot made the game worse generally over the years?
You know what? I would say over the time they had really bad decisions, they had really good decisions. Like the idea they generally were like right on most decisions. I out your mind. What are the odds? Oh, you must be the luckiest guy ever, Loco. They just made a game perfect for you.
So
There's a million things they did, man. You know, do you want us to start? So we'll start here. So Season 4, when they just buffed all the defensive masteries, and now a Dr. Mundo in the top lane with a Thornmail is like, at times the AD carry literally will die if he hits this tank. Like when an AD carry dies hitting a tank, there's a problem with the design of your game.
Okay, wait, no, time out. I want to time out because your chat is gonna spam true. Yeah, that's true. I'm an ADC player because there's more ADC players than tank players, and they're gonna be biased to be like, oh yeah, Thorin got us on that. What Loco is not saying is and I even admit this too, with things like, tank metas, with things like the Juggernaut patch, we have made bad metas and certainly made mistakes with the balance of the game. What Loco is saying though is that the general trajectory of the game has gotten better. So that holistically, looking at the course of say like Season 8 or Season 9 is better than say Season 4 or Season 5. That's his argument. Let's get to that.
That's exactly.
You need to explain how that makes sense.
I want to hear Loco's.
To give you an example, okay, let's use the example I gave. I gave Season 4, basically Season 4 spring actually. If you go back to 2014, it was right after Season 3, which if you remember, crucially, Season 3 summer was the super assassin meta where the assassin mid laners killed everyone, and it went into Worlds, which everyone remembers was a very dynamic one. You had all the pick comps, etc. So those are such a harsh contrast, right? That anyone who likes the Season 3 meta is going to hate that Season 4 meta. So in this world, you generally didn't like the Season 4 meta change, right?
Yeah, so what I'm saying is Riot is not perfect, and they didn't make the perfect game. But what I'm saying is Season 3, people that are saying stuff like, oh, the game was so good in Season 3, Season 4, Riot has fucked the game. Like Season 9 and Season 8 are absolutely fucking garbage, I think are wrong. Like I think every season the game has gotten better and better and better and better.
In what context? Better in what metrics?
Better in terms of playing the game has been more of an enjoyable experience. There are certain power gaps between certain roles has shrunken down, where it used to be so much about mid lane and AD carry. There's been more variety in roles possible.
They give more gold and more stats to all those other roles. Like these aren't things that happened in the game, mate. They changed that.
Yeah, so I think the general outcome, what League of Legends is much more playable and much more fun to play and much more better viewing experience.
Like what I'm going to do is take what you just did there and show why that was an incredibly subjective answer. That I'm not saying you literally said everyone thinks that, but you presented it as though it was objective. So here's the difference, right? The game is a finite amount of resources in the game. There are even a finite amount of people who can be the star of the game, who can be the guy who was the main person who made you win the game. Like, there are only so many resources on a team, on the map, between the two teams in terms of time left on the clock, amount of gold, dragon. There are only finite resources, right? So when you give resources to certain roles which didn't used to have very much support jungle, you're giving these more agency, more power,
You're taking
sometimes
them away.
literally more damage, better items, more gold. You are taking, relative to the other roles, nothing literally from those roles, but you are in the context of the game state. So, for example, that makes sense, Loco, why if you were a support player, you would say, I find this game more fun in Season 9 than it was in Season 3. But you know what? If you're an AD carry player, you might go, well, actually, I find it much less fun. I now feel like I have less impact on, so like, that, what's bizarre about the way you said that was, like, I know what you mean, but like, as far as I can tell, that just means you like those roles to be more powerful. So I don't really know that it's like a consensus or that generally you've got like a principle. Like, surely it's just you subjectively like it.
Well,
so
go ahead, Blau.
I was going to win. Okay, so I said I wouldn't share secret Riot data, but I have secret Riot data to share now because and now Thorn won't get mad at me for sharing secret Riot data because it supports his. So we do have actually a method of tracking this, right? Of tracking the agency of a position, and he's right there. We've actually, in terms of the agency of positions in League, the spread was much greater historically, and actually has shrunk. Support still has the lowest agency in the game, and I don't want to go into how we measure agency, but yeah, that's like generally true by the metrics that we use to measure it. The question then for like Thorn or for Loco or for someone looking at this game is like, what is the ideal agency spread? Should mid lane always be the most impactful role? Should support always be the least impactful role? Okay, if we agree on those two things, how far apart should they be? Should they be relatively close? Should they be relatively far away? Once you decide on those two roles, where does jungle fit in? Where does top lane fit in? And where does ADC fit in? And then once you even decide on those, you have to be like, well, what?
You cut out for the last second.
Say that last sentence again.
Oh, sorry. I was saying, where do those roles have that agency over the course of the game, right? Because we actually find that during one of the big things about the 8-11 changes was that marksman champions did lose that agency, and specifically they lost that agency in the late game.
Oh,
no, it was actually.
It was in the late 11 when we had the Ardent Sensor meta. That's what you're talking about?
Oh no. During the Ardent Sensor meta was insane. Both them and support.
When was 8-11 then?
8-11 was the marksman item one. That was when we did like that was mages in the bot lane, double if playing Vlad.
Oh right, so it was the funnel meta late last year. Right?
Let me go first in the agency thing. I think overall, all roles should have same agency. So every role should have 20% agency, but during different periods of the game, the agency can change. Like ADCs, it's okay for them to have low agency earlier on in the game as your agency gets higher and higher later on in the game. Jungle can have very high agency earlier on in the game, but as the game goes, they can have lower agency. But I think overall, every role should have same agency on the game.
1 second.
I disagree.
Like, what? Here's the question. Why start at that position? Like, you just made basically, if we were doing philosophy here, you just stated an axiom. Every role should be created equal, but they should have difference in all right. Okay, but why? Why should each role have 20% agency?
Yeah.
I think it's kind of bullshitty for a certain role to have very little control on the game. And
have you ever played football, American football?
Yeah, I mean, people want to be quarterback. Quarterback gets paid the most. Like,
forget just quarterback. You want to be the quarterback, or you want to be like
wide receiver, left tackle,
running back,
pass rusher.
You want to be, like a pass rusher. Exactly, right? These roles have significantly more agency. In fact, in American football, there are people whose whole job is just do something small that gives that other guy even more agency.
Yeah.
Like the best example ever, right, would be anyone who saw the last Super Bowl knows that the real reason why, like, it's almost a poison chalice as to who you were giving the MVP to is the MVP wasn't really one person. Like, it was very hard to pick. It was a whole defensive line who made other players then able to be activated in the game and look fucking good. So the point in this scenario is, as far as I know, Loco, much like life itself, because as a quick side tangent, I actually find that sports at their best are basically like microcosms of life, like in how you are rewarded for hard work and teamwork and how you can overcome like certain strengths that someone else has by working with someone else or strategically getting an advantage. You know, all these factors are kind of like parallels for life. But the one area actually where esports games run into an area that I find goes counter to what most people in life appreciate is this aspect where everyone's supposed to be having fun. Everyone's supposed to be having a good time. Everyone's supposed to have a chance to win. These are literally antithetical to everything I believe in esports. Like, there are certain roles that are to carry. What I love about games like Dota is they divide the roles by farm priority. They know immediately from day one of the meta where your bread is buttered. Now, within that, you know, Loco, there's still agency. Like, for example, if you are an amazing offlaner, third position in terms of farm meta, there are players like Zai, Universe. These guys will get way more gold at that position than someone else would. There are certain hard supports who actually will play a little bit more of a gold game, whereas someone like PPD, for example, Xiaowei, they will play with no gold, no resources. They want it to be as hard as possible. I'm going to give all the resources elsewhere. The point is, every single team sport, a game I'm aware of, has massive role imbalance. In fact, a game like soccer, there's literally even people whose job it is just to score. You pass the ball to him so he can score. Like, it's absolutely tiered. So you're actually coming at it, Loco. I'm not saying you're wrong, but I'm saying you do realize you're coming at it from a completely different paradigm to any other team game.
Yeah, for sure. So let's say like Madden was like an online game. Like, you can play Madden and you can like choose to be like anyone on the field, right? There would be no one queuing up for certain positions. Like, if it was so boring and it had so little agency on the game, like that position would be so unfun. Where
there would just be way less than the other ones. I agree. There would be way less people playing left tackle than quarterback. Yes, you're right.
If support was so fucking worthless and their agency was near like season 1, season 2 levels, where you didn't like, you sat in lane with Heart of Gold, you bought Oracle elixirs, and you had to constantly buy wards, and there was no Sightstone, and you were just ward bot, it would be an incredibly unfun and an incredibly unattractive and quite frankly like a boring role to play. So
I agree with that.
I do think the agency for roles can be equal, and there still can be very different in the roles, and you can still reward very different skill level with the agencies being similar.
So to chime in, I agreed with that last point of Loco about the improving of support. I disagree that all the agencies should be the same. I agree with Thorin about I actually overall agree with Thorin's points here, but Thorin, I disagree. Everyone should have. Hey, we're all playing we all play in League, we're all playing.
No,
it's just a game, you know.
My point there is I'm meaning that as extreme and as literal as it is. As in, for example, if you're playing a game where your team's super behind and you've done really badly individually, you shouldn't be having fun at that point in time. You are in a bad game state because you have made presumably many bad decisions, or you have been outplayed many times. Like, being down 37-0 in an NFL game with 4 minutes left isn't fun for anyone. Like, I just mean it in the most literal sense. Like, if you're trying to make the game too balanced and too kind of kid gloves, you're not going to get actually like the really high level experience, in my opinion.
But because it's not just a game, it's a sport. Like I said earlier, fucking got you there. Anyways,
you didn't, because I was talking about playing it in solo queue where it's explicitly not a sport.
But no, I think in solo queue that's how people think about it, is as a sport. And so to your point about those roles, I also think it's about again, we talk about not just the agency, but also the motivations for playing different stuff. And so I do actually think Thorin's points here were really good about why someone wants to be a quarterback or why they want to be a different position. I think there are some people in League who don't want the agency of a mid laner. I think having a role that specifically has lower agency like support is good. I think there are people who want to play that role, and it does a better job for the game that way.
Why not? I'll avoid the potentially controversial aspect here, right? Which is fairly obvious. And as I explain my point, you'll see what the obvious elephant in the room is. And I'll just make it very, very politically safe. And I'll say, I agree. There are certain types of people who don't want to play and have the pressure on them at, it's 25-minute team fights. I'm the AD carry. I must carry this team fight or we lose the game. There are some people who want a role like support where it's about helping people. And it's about, I win if this guy does well. If I keep him alive, he does well. And they have different goals. They have a different sense of what makes for a fun game. And crucially, if they're not actually as capable of doing something like carrying a whole game of Dota 2, instead they can do something that still makes them feel like they contributed. And that is a good thing, in my opinion, Loco. Now, what I obviously didn't address there was, that's actually a certain type of person more than just a random one there. There are certain like identity group breakdowns as to who might like that role. But here's the thing.
That's actually what Blau studies. That's what Blau studies.
Listen, That's not actually a bad thing, by the way, because that's one of the reasons, again, to tie it into what we said at the beginning of the episode, I would speculate that's one of the reasons League of Legends is such a popular game, is that it isn't like Dota 2, which is a very hardcore game. Like, if you start having a bad game in Dota 2, oh, Jesus, it's one of the worst experiences ever. Like, because everything's so hardcore, everything's so super. So if you just want a fun casual experience, League actually, I think, benefits from role imbalance in that sense, Loco.
All right, Blau, go ahead.
No, so I was gonna say, yeah, but when you talk about the like who's the kind of person who takes that supportive role, I mean, like in the NFL, it's dudes who are 6'7" and weigh like 300 pounds and could crush me or you, right? Those are the people protecting their quarterback, right?
Sure.
And they play a different sort of mindset. Now, and by the way, I think
it's a different game.
Yeah, true. Now, I think at the highest level, and this is the thing, there's also a thing about how people win games or how they express their skill that is also just a little different. Like, I think when we look at, like, no one is gonna like meme on Core JJ as a support. The dude is insane, and what he brings to that team is unreal. It's a different kind of skill than a top laner like Broken Blade brings, or a mid laner like Faker brings, right? Like, there are different avenues of skill in League of Legends, and so by allowing agency to be different in the game, by saying, yeah, like supports, you don't get as much agency, you don't get the gold to work with, we open up a whole new way for them to express themselves. They express themselves through vision control. They express themselves oftentimes, by the way, I forgot when we saw this. I learned, I don't know, and maybe I'm going to be wrong, Cloud9 full of shit, but because of the mechanics required to be an ADC, I don't think I'd ever want an ADC to shot call a game. I would want my, and unless they're shot calling the play of like help up, or like attack this guy. In general, I want my ADC focusing on their mechanical play. I think some of the big brain people we've seen on some teams are actually the supports, who, because they don't have to have the mechanical demand in the game, they can be thinking about the rotations, strategic play, etc. And I remember watching VODs from like Cloud9 with like their mics, and like, dude, Zeyzal is not only playing support really well, Zeyzal's like telling everyone what to do and is shepherding them around. That's a different skill avenue that, even if it has less agency by a traditional standard, is still a new sort of way to express themselves. So, and I think me and Thorn are aligned here, which is that, like, you actually do need, like, yeah, some roles just don't get as much gold, don't get as much resources. They don't have the wave of skill expression of others. I think that's actually healthy for the game. The question is, what is the right balance?
But even
and that's where it gets tricky.
The thing is, like, if you, as you talked about, like support, you don't get as much gold and you're not as powerful. But at certain points of the game, you have to be more powerful, and like you have to be allowed to do stuff. Like, supports are extremely powerful early game when AD carries don't have items, and the tool to able to peel off people and able to CC people or knock someone back are extremely powerful tools, so that are given to support. I don't think agency is just about how much gold you have, how much damage you can do. There's agency in utility, and like supports get that, and I think it's fine for that utility to matter and that utility to be powerful. And
well, when I say agency, like there is actually an objective metric, which is basic, and like you could probably take this same metric and apply it to football, and you'll find a similar thing, which is basically in a given game, there's like fluctuations in players' elo, their MMR, right? Not their rank. Side note on this, the players who are like freaking out, like, oh, like, why do I keep getting these like diamonds in my game? Like, oh, these like people are like this diamond player, this planet. It's like the rank, you can be a pro player can be a platinum player and just hasn't upped their rank enough, and their MMR, their elo is really high. Doesn't like ignore their rank, think about their elo. So again, thinking about the fluctuating elos on what position do you want the highest elo player on your team to be in? And that's actually when we think about agency, and we can actually like predict the likelihood of a team to win based on what role they're in. So to Thorn's point earlier, it's mid lane, right? Like mid lane is typically where the best players, and we could probably do the same thing for football. If you took a random smattering of NFL players and you're like, yeah, I'm going to put the highest rated linebacker on this team and then the highest rated quarterback on the other team, which team's more likely to win, right?
Obviously, sure.
Yeah. So that's what I'm talking about when I see Loco, is like that actual like objective measurement of likely game in those positions. And I think it's okay to have that spread, to have mid laners be more of the stars of the game, right? I mean, like, that's kind of what makes a lot of sports interesting. People love, honestly, some of the best basketball is when we get to see the star players pop off, right?
But Blau, is it ideal that mid laner has the most agency from start to finish to
The
simplify
problem
it?
with that is, Loco, when you say ideal, what do you mean by that? What does ideal mean to you?
Does Riot want mid laner to have the most
Right,
agency from start to finish? Shouldn't supports or other roles have more agency at the start of the game? Like, shouldn't it average out where each role has similar amount of agency? Like, mid laners can have more agency in mid game, in late game, whenever they get items or whenever they level up. But early levels, like, shouldn't support matter more? Like, shouldn't jungle matter more?
So my answer to that would be that objectively, averaged out over the average game time, okay for roles to have different degrees of agency, because the kind of motivations for a player to go and play mid lane versus top lane versus support, there are different motivations that want them to have different impacts on the game, right? Like, for instance, I recently kind of shifted to top lane because I'm okay taking less agency on the game to play the play style of I just get to 1v1 this dude. I like that more, or 1v2 is the case if I overextend, right? But I do agree that it's also useful to have varying degrees of agency throughout the game. We do see that marksman, or well, rather the ADC role, bot lane role, has the highest degree, like starts to go up in agency once you get past a certain threshold. So yes, originally when you have your highest player in a game being mid lane, it's going to give you the highest likelihood to win. But if I ignore all the games that didn't end before 30 minutes and I look only at the games that went past 30 minutes, and I don't know if don't quote me on that for the actual data, that I'm just using that as an example, there's some threshold where as the games go later, having your highest elo player be the marksman player will actually be the reason why you win the game. And there's varying degrees of that throughout the game. And part of the reason why this is actually a complex analysis and like hard to even fully suss out is because of dependencies, right? Like, if you might have the best mid laner, but if your jungler is actually the worst on your team and they fuck over your mid laner is not going to be able to shine. Again, let's take the analogy to football. You might have been the team that got the best quarterback, but if you have the worst, I don't know who's the
left tackle
person. If you have the worst left tackle and your quarterback gets fucked because of blitzes, they're not going to be able to shine, right? So obviously it gets complicated by those dependencies, but I do disagree overall, Loco. I think it's okay to overall have varying degrees of agency regardless of game state.
Wow. I'm surprised because that's not been the overall Riot viewpoint, in my opinion, as an AD carry player. I used to be the most powerful player. I used to be called ADC, and then Riot did not like carry was part of my name. They actively did not like that I was the carry role, and they renamed me to marksman, and they made me weaker over the seasons to make sure other roles can have more agency and take away
That's not why you're in Diamond 2 now.
That's not why we renamed.
All right, you meant the role. My bad. My mistake.
That's not why we've renamed it.
You took away a marksman agency. You made marksmans like less, like that was the fantasy for AD carries, to like be the uber carry, like to be like super strong, and you took away a lot of agency and
we gave it and we gave it back recently. And to be fair, I think again we talked about the spectrum of this agency. And it fluctuates, and it's about finding that right amount. Yeah, I think the 8-11 changes were not good for marksman agency. By the way, don't say that we changed it because we wanted to take the carry out of the name. I'm pretty sure we changed it just because we have an idea of like champion classes. There are marksmen, there are divers, there are mages, right? Like we have like champion class.
Homie, don't go down this road. This is a bad. There's only dead bodies and ghosts down this road.
No, but
I'm going to tell you this. Okay, go on. What classification does Echo have?
Does Echo have assassin? Skirmish.
Oh, assassin! You mean that role that everyone was building as a tank, top lane, and was killing everyone with mad damage?
And they
no, but he's a champion that can.
My point is the classifications don't even make sense themselves. Like half the classifications don't work because sometimes when you change the item paths, people build builds that make it not even work that way. Like you have mad tanky champions that weren't even supposed to be.
Sure. So do you know what? So do you know what the actual thing we should call it is? It's not ADC and it's not It's bot lane.
I've got a crazy idea for you guys. Maybe stop this mad Orwellian attempt to control how people choose to play a video game. Just give people a bunch of tools and let them go ahead and go at it. You know, like checks notes, every other game developer ever, right?
It's
well,
not.
cool.
It's
That's
not.
that, then.
It's not Orwellian. It's like, listen.
That's that then.
It's not. No, stop. It's not Orwellian. We have a middle lane. We have a top lane.
Yeah.
We have a jungle. What's the one in the bottom called? ADC? No, it's bot lane. Come on, dude. Because people are playing. What do you call it when people play Talia Pantheon in the bot lane?
What is it? Getting zero.
A fun time.
Is that
A fun
Getting zero
time
three in
for everyone
finals.
involved. Yeah, exactly.
Wait, I fucking hate that people are allowed to play Talia Pantheon in bot lane. Like, when I play AD carry, there's a certain expectation that I have whenever I go into lane that I will be playing against another marksman, as you like to call it, and a support champion. And when my expectation of that breaks, I don't get kind of what I signed up for. That's why I went into marksman lane. Like, that's why I went into bot lane, to play versus other ADC and support. And I hate that Riot has allowed AP carries and like these double bruisers to exist.
All right, let's.
So many jokes about Riot I could make here that I'll spare Blastoise.
No! Don't spare me.
All right, I'll give you it then. Right,
Well,
the only time I want to see marksmans in the game is when it's that guy who was Mark Merrill's bod who was helping boost him back in season 2. Shout out to you. Is that where you came up with the idea, Mark? Your man in the game. Oh right, sorry, wait, it's a roll. My mistake.
Wait,
my mistake. I embarrassed you all.
Blau. Isn't like
that was actually a pretty good joke.
Wasn't bad.
I'm gonna give you credit.
You guys broke expectations for bot lane, like allowing like these things to happen in the game. It's like in the game, like these off meta things, like I would say 80% of League of Legends, like it's been EU style. We don't even call it EU style anymore because it is normalized what bot lane is, like a marksman and a support. And sometimes like that shit goes out of whack, and I feel like it's so unhealthy for the game, and it kills the expectation that bot laners have.
Okay, let's discuss this. This is our next topic. The marksman ADC in the bot lane versus other champions in the bot lane, and like what Riot's goals were with 811 versus our execution of 811. So off the start, I'm going to say our execution on 811, and we agree. This is not my.
He also means
take.
going forward to now, though. Like even when you have to be a Pantheon. So like, why basically are these things that if we followed your ruling, would be other roles? Why are they allowed to be part of another role?
No, that's right. Yeah, even to this day, not just. So I would say the changes we made in 811.
Blah, you're cutting out. Stay close to the mic. You're cutting out.
Oh, sorry. My bad. I think even Riot's stance on this is that from 811, or like the execution on 811 was not good. This is something I talked to Loco about. This is one where it's like, we didn't expect it to actually shake it up that much. And if we were going to do that in the future, that should have been a preseason change. And that should have been communicated to pro players so that you don't have Reckless benching himself. You don't have Double Lift playing Vlad. That was a yikes. That being said, what that actually does to the game, the idea that we have different classes of champions being played in the bot lane, even if it's not the majority of the games, I also will wager that the majority of Riot design agrees that that is better for the game long term. Gonna talk about why, because I know Thorn and Loco both call me out and be like, oh, where's your reasoning for this? So if we look at every other position in the game, there is at least some variety of class of champions, right? Like when you're playing in the top lane, we have tank metas, right? Where we have tanks playing against each other. We have carry metas where two carries will play. We sometimes have a carry versus a tank, right? Where the carry's role is to get strong enough, oftentimes so that they can split push, split the map. The tank wants to maintain its relevancy so that it can team fight. And we have all sorts of this kind of class diversity across the board. It fluctuates at times. Sometimes it gets stagnant, but generally every other position plays different things. Junglers play marksman champions. They play Kindred. They play Graves. Kindred actually being a marksman, Graves being a whatever the fuck he is. But they also play tanks. They also play fighters. They also play assassins. All of a sudden, there's only one only one position in the game that arguably is a little privileged in the sense that it gets to play only one class of champions. And granted, I think that class of champions requires a very unique skill set of orb walking or stutter stepping, whatever you want to call it. But I think again, when we talk about like why League of Legends is such a deep game and what makes it interesting long term is because of that variety of gameplay. And so I think having things like Yasuo in the bot lane or Talia Pantheon in the bot lane, having some of those things. Now, here's the thing. I agree with you, Loco. We've set expectations with players that they should be able to play their right-click champions, their Caitlyn's, their Tristanas, etc. in the bot lane, and that's like their zone. But I still think we should be like, there should be room for some degree of spice, for some variety in those, and the game will be better for that. It creates more interesting things for the game long term, and this segues into why I really like G2's perks as a player, because dude can play marksman champions. It turns out he's a mid laner who can also play the mark style, can play the right click style, and he can pop off on Yasuo, and he can pop off on these other characters that he's bringing to the bot lane, and that adds way more. Like, I'd say this, I think it makes League of Legends a cooler experience, both for the viewer and for the player. So that is my call. Now, feel free to agree or disagree.
Well, specialization is like a skill that should be celebrated. Like, I agree variety should be celebrated, but also specialization, it's not like people play marksman and it's, in a way, it is a very boring role because it is very specialized in what you do, and the interactions are very linear. Like, you either are mechanically good enough and mechanically consistent enough to do this, and that's what you're getting awarded for. So what's wrong with like specialization of being an AD carry player? And the more you have to diversify your skill set, the less specialization you can have and the less expertise and the mastery you can have over a certain role. So I think it's completely fine. Like, if you play top lane, here are a certain class of champions you're expected to play, and keep it within those like parameters. And if you want to play a champion that's not in the parameters of top lane, learn a different role. And that's what's different about mid lane to marksman. Like, mid lane, you're expected to play everything. You're expected to play tanks, you're expected to play assassins, mages, whatever. In AD carry, you're only expected to play marksman, and that is what makes that role special.
Okay, but and I'm really curious now to hear, because you said something earlier that should dictate where you lie on this, Thorn. So where do you think?
Well, the thing is, like, actually, I can even solve Loco's problem for him. If you want this to be the case, Loco, that there's always an AD carry in the game, then here's pretty simple. Do you remember season 2? Because actually, Blastoise technically fucked up. You know, when he was like, why is it called the top lane and then the mid lane? Not, I think you mean the AP carry, don't you? That was a role that used to be in League of Legends. Remember, they used to have the AD carry and the AP carry.
I didn't play.
Now, here's the thing. If you buff AP and AD, as in certain champions or items have higher AP and AD values, then naturally you are going to have people who will have to build those in the game. Because if we don't have an AD and they have an AD and they have loads of attack damage and we haven't built all the like tank items, then we are fucked. That guy's going to be the guy who's naturally out of control. So first of all, there's that aspect. That's a way that you can, if you wanted to. The question is if Riot does or not. If you wanted to dictate the game state, that would be one way to do it. You would essentially incentivize having each of these roles on the map. And then the second thing I would say overall is actually Loco's almost like, I mean, I won't go too far by saying it's like some socialist utopia of like everyone will have equal agency and 20% of the resources. Like, that's actually not even going to be possible anyway, Loco. And here's a very counterintuitive reason why that is specific to League of Legends. So one of the things I always found fascinating about League of Legends is in Dota, you can play most heroes in almost any lane. It just depends on you. Like, a lot of how they do it is you're not going into it thinking like this is going to win the lane match. You're going into it, some of them thinking this is a skill matchup. I'm very good at this hero. I want to use these specific abilities. I'm going to use it in this role because it's going to work this way against their comp. You think about it that way, right? The reason why in League you don't have 5 champions that can go into all 5 lanes, except for a very rare occasion, there might be one that goes into 3 or 4, is because actually in League, one of the things I found quite interesting, and people don't talk about it, is the role that a lane that a champion goes into depends how OP the champion is. So, for example, certain champions, famously, there's been times when AD carry champions swapped into the mid lane. That's because they were OP as fuck at the time. So at the time, mid lane was a stronger role, so now it became incredibly strong to play an AD in the mid lane. There have been a whole bunch of these examples. So sometimes when they get fucked, they end up as a top laner. When they get fucked more, they end up as a jungler. It's like, obviously it depends on the champion, but there's almost like a journey they make through the map depending on how strong they are at the time and in the meta. So there never will be an ideal balance because someone's going to have all the strong champions.
No, I disagree with that. I disagree with that because I think the strength of a champion, the just overall power of a champion, just because you're the highest win rate champion or the like objectively most tuned champion, doesn't mean that you have the ability to clear a jungle and then therefore can go in the jungle. It doesn't mean you have the pushing priority that can put you in mid lane. Similarly, some of the like you can have an overtuned marksman again, unless it is a marksman like Lucian that has we could overtune the shit out of Jinx and make her just objectively the strongest character in the game, and in pro play they probably still can't play her the mid, right? Because she would be too vulnerable to ganks, right? There's certain elements of their kit that won't let them be played in those, or that make them weaker or stronger in this role. So I actually disagree with that. I do agree that in some instances. So I think your instance of marksmen that then get played in mid, like Lucian, I think is a great example of that. But for a lot of champions, I think elements of their kit make it so they could not be played in other positions because their weaknesses are either overexposed in that position or their strengths are diminished in that position.
Isn't it toxic to have certain like champions then be able to be played in other roles? Like marksman and top lane notoriously can be so toxic for the traditional like top lane champions that are supposed to exist there. Like Vayne top lane, like when it's strong or when it's overtuned, like being played top is absolutely disgusting for top laners.
Yeah, I probably, there was actually one more point I still wanted to get to, which is to come back to yours, Loco. And this is where I know Thorn's going to agree with me. Because Thorn is all about, and Thorn's about the meritocracy of these sports, right? He's about the best players being the best. So if I give you, let's say I give you double lift, but I give you a double lift who's also an insane Vladimir player, and I say Vladimir is also viable in the bot lane, who's the better player? Double lift with no Vladimir player, or double lift so has the same mechanical skill with the marksman champions, but is just a more gifted, more talented player and also can play Vladimir and Swain in the bot lane? Who's the better player? Who should shine more, right? If in a way Riot has made it so that champion classes that play in the bot lane, all of a sudden the burden of skill on the bot laners has gone up. They can't just play right-click champions. They have another avenue of expressing their skill. So shouldn't the better players rise to the top that way? Thorin, what do you think?
The problem with that is like it's the difference between having a role in a game and being an overall player. So I would agree, in theory, the better overall player is the guy who can play a normal AD carry and Vladimir. In theory, the problem with that for me though is like I kind of agree sort of with Loco on the concept there should be specialization in as much as like I'll give you a very, very quick analogy. So in the old days when I used to play Quake and Counter-Strike came out as a game, believe it or not, I know to modern day players, they'll think of Counter-Strike as a hardcore game, but compared to Quake, it was actually considered everything people would talk about Fortnite as now. Like, oh, it's just watered down and it's for casuals and there's less skill. And look, you know, for example, you know, in Quake, you move very fast, there's a lot of air movement, etc. They were like, you know, it takes no skill because you just run around and you can't move as quickly and can't dodge as well. And then, for example, you know, with the weapons in Counter-Strike, famously, they have a little bit of RNG, not a lot, but a little bit, you know, where it's like it doesn't always go the bullet where you fire it. Whereas in Quake, every single gun goes exactly where you're firing, or they're a projectile which goes at the trajectory towards them. So again, people said no skill in the game, you know, that's worse. And one of the points I was able to make to some of these people, which seems counterintuitive, but they do get when you explain it, is that's because Quake basically is like a decathlon. It's like you have to do 10 different sporting endeavors all at once, combined to decide if you're better. Whereas in Counter-Strike, almost every weapon is actually a hit scan weapon that hits at any range, and you have to aim for things like the head. You have to specialize. And so really Counter-Strike isn't about having the best movement and having the best dodging and having all those things matter very little. It's about having the best precise aim and about having coordination with it. So the point here is like, I think it's really asking whether or not you agree with Loco's position. If you agree there should be roles, then in a way it is unfair that you have a role that's like, as you're saying, right-clicking people and doing attack damage. And then you're saying, yeah, but can you balance on your head while a fucking pig slaps your ass? Then you're not as good, are you? It's like, is that really part of the role? That's the question.
Blah blah.
By the way, I said I think like I was literally thinking of the counter. I think that's an excellent counter argument to my point. But it is the degree of it, right? Like if I said you also have to what was it? Stand on your head and slap a pig's ass, right? If I said you had to do that, people like that. Yeah, whatever.
Blau, remember when you did your whole GDC talk, you talked about people resonate with certain characters, right? Like you matched, I think Pokimane with Lux, Yasuo with Yasuo, obviously.
Mo with Yasuo.
I always associate Pokemon with Anivia personally, but I don't know why.
Oh my god, Thorin, let's not.
Got my brain, so,
Oh my god.
I just love Anivia, Froggen fan, aren't I? So.
Okay, and like.
Dude, these idiots here, man. Come on.
Jeez.
Oh my god, and Hashinshin with like Olaf, right? But people don't just.
Is Olaf for sure.
But people don't just resonate with certain champion. Like you don't say you're like an Olaf player. Like most League of Legends players say, I'm a bot laner, I'm a top laner, I'm a mid laner, and there are certain aspects to that role, right? Like bot lane, you get awarded for a certain amount of skill for certain different things. Like in mid lane, you get awarded for having certain different skills, like for these specialization. If every role can play marksman, if every role can play mages, every role can play tanks, every role can play supports, then you take away what's different about every role, and you take away the specialization of every role, and you take away why people gravitate towards certain roles. Like we talked about how important it was. There's roles that people that don't want agency to go to in support. By making, carry champions to be able to also be played in support role, you take away that specialization and what was drawing them to that in the first place.
So the response is, so I think actually both your counterpoints are really good. I really liked Thorns because it's basically like saying, hey, in any degree of skill, you can say, oh, we can always make something harder, but if it's arbitrarily harder, it doesn't matter. Again, yeah, like what if the quarterback, the NFL implemented a rule where quarterbacks had to do a backflip before they could throw the ball, right? Like, yeah, it'd make it more hard. Like, it's certainly like, would Tom Brady be the greatest quarterback? I don't know. Can he do a backflip?
Probably not.
Right? Yeah, probably not, right? But I think there's something to be said though, where that is an argument, but the question is being able to play mage champions along with marksman champions in the bot lane the equivalent of standing on your head and slapping a pig's ass? Probably not, but we could argue that it's gone too far. To Loco's point, Loco kind of gets at this a little bit, which is there's certain expectations players have when they play a role. But there are some people who probably say they're a mid lane or a mid main or a top main, but I actually think they tend to more associate with like types of champions. I do think that it is the case that bot laners have always said they are marksman players, but a lot of mid laners are assassin players, right? Like they only play assassins mid. When we think of, relevant to some things said earlier, when we think of TF Blade plays, we could say TF Blade plays like the carry skirmishers, right? Mm-hmm. He's known for Aurelia, Jax, but like you can also play like Scion and Malphite top lane, but would TF Blade be playing those? No, but there's tank top laners who play those. Meanwhile, Hashinshin plays the like smash your head in champions, right? He plays Aatrox, he plays Olaf. He's associated with those characters. My point is that no other position in the game has only one type of champion class being played. In mid lane, there are mage players. There's the dude who's like only going to play the artillery mages, like he's only going to play Xerath and Ziggs. There's the the edgelord mid laner. He's going to play Yasuo or he's going to play Zed. And there's so much more variety in those, as well as in as well as in jungle, as well as in top. It's only in bot lane where it's like I only play marksman, right? Mm-hmm. So I'm not saying that like. And so I agree. We shouldn't be having people stand on their head and slap a pig's ass. You shouldn't have to learn every single champion type. I think a player should be able to play only marksman champions in the bot lane. But I also think that non-marksman champions should be relevant in the bot lane. And the extra, so we're talking about normal play. When we get to the pro level, there's an extra burden there where if it's not a tank meta, is Impact going to not play as well because he's better on tanks than he is on carries? If it's a tank meta, is Rookie not going to play, or not Rookie? Who's IG's top laner? The Shy?
The Shy.
Yeah, the Shy is not going to potentially play as well on a tank meta as he will in a carry meta, right? But the best players, Faker being a great example of one of the best players of all time, Faker's adaptability to be able to play whatever was strong or could be played in the mid lane or could be a counter pick in the mid lane was extremely beneficial. I think there's a certain point, right? Like if we're saying bot lane is like tanks, like 2 tanks versus 2 tanks, that's probably a little troll from us. But I don't think the idea that like Vladimir or like a mage or a Yasuo being played in the bot lane is bad for the game. I think it's good for the game. Probably not all the time. Probably there's a sweet spot that like, hey, maybe 80% of the time, 90% of the time we're seeing marksmen because that's where we expect to see them. But every now and then I think it's good for the game to get that spice, to see something different played there.
But people will reach higher levels of mastery at a
Hey, what's up, Reggie?
People will reach higher level of mastery at a certain skill, at a certain role, if that skill and skill that's expected is narrowed and more specialized. Like, we can't get the shy doing...
Have you been lobbied by fucking Reckless before this episode? Is he secretly paying you to make all these points along these lines? Like, we should only have to play 2 champions.
No, if you expect, like, if you tell a quarterback that he has to throw the ball and he also has to do... I don't know, like he also
has to run the ball,
but that's limited. You're limiting them to those 2. Like you don't ask a quarterback to block. When a quarterback throws an interception, a lot of quarterbacks step out of the way. Like they don't go and tackle. Like because that's not the expectation for quarterbacks. Like and that's why they're able to specialize. Like if from the start bot lane was about playing multiple roles, like Doublelift wouldn't be at the height of his game, and whoever was at the height of their game wouldn't reach the absolute like height of that certain skill set. Like, the Shy is incredibly good on carries because he was able to specialize. Like, there are certain skill sets that get rewarded for certain roles.
I would say here's the problem, Loco. Like, for me, I'll just make a very quick point because this could get really way too long because it could get too abstract. But I'll just make a meta point about games like Dota and League of Legends, which is... One of the problems here is I gave the counter that in Dota, basically, this is possible. Every hero, in theory... keyword being in theory, could be played in every role in the game, right? Mm-hmm. But part of the reason why that is because Dota 2 operates entirely differently in terms of the fact that like you don't just level up and get stronger, you get the items, and so a lot of it's based around the gold, and then there's all sorts of elements. There's denying creeps, so now like having extra strengths as a laner matches out certain matchups that otherwise in a game like League maybe would be more, you know, one person wins at 70% of the time and he'll get those edges anyway, and if he's not as good a player. So the point I would generally make is this: you're sort of heading to an extreme angle where like you want to have it like the set roles per lane, the set champion pools per lane almost. That's like the world almost you're implying you go towards, or at least the expectation. So the real problem I have with this is if you play a game like Dota, part of it is it's very rare there is an OP champion that takes over the game. It's more like, right, what's my skill? What are my toolkits, right? We've got this hero, this hero, this hero, this hero. Here's what we're going to do with it. And because of that, you don't even go into the game thinking we've lost the game already, generally from the draft, right? But in League, the way the game is, and this is part of the reason I think it's popular as a casual game, is it's a lot more streamlined. Like there are certain things that everyone knows in the game state at the moment, like this is the most powerful item for this character. This is the best. If he hits this spike at this point, he's going to have agency now. Because the things are a bit more streamlined, the problem is, like, I think it's a lot harder to make everything be available in that sense. Like basically it goes against that streamlining Loco. So the problem is how close to the middle do you go? Because I think you should pick one direction or the other. I think you should go to like more of a set structure or more of a free-for-all aspect. I think it's really hard to balance in the middle, because you're going to get caught in scenarios like you say, where basically there is that limitation on most roles, but then there's this random one where like this one has extra champions. It happens in other roles as well. Like I said, ADs sometimes were playable in mid, where some people were true mage players who didn't want to play them. You know, they didn't want to play whatever the fuck it was, Zed at the time, or Yasuo or something, you know.
And one thing I do want to get in about this, because I agree Riot was off here, so I'll admit our mistakes here, which is there's also a degree of like how much time we even give you to adjust to these things. So one thing we haven't covered, I think we would probably all agree on, is like that we implemented these changes in the middle of the season was probably also where a lot, I don't think we would actually be having as much of a conversation about this if Riot had like done this as a preseason thing, had told all the pro teams ahead of time, like, hey, our goals are, like, we still want marksmen to typically be played in the bot lane, but we're trying to open it up so some other champions can be played there. Here's our plans in this. Instead, we kind of just like hit people with that in patch 8.11. And that's where I think a lot of the frustration with it comes from, was our execution of it and not necessarily the goals. Because
Yeah,
I think
but I will say this, put it this way, okay? This is where I actually have some more experience that I wouldn't have had like 2 years ago on a talk show. So I would probably, as a purist, have naively argued something very similar to what Loco argues, actually, that he thinks, for example, when you have an LCS split, you should have a set patch for that split. You know, like it should be like this split is played on 8.14 or whatever, you know, and the idea is you get full time for everyone to work out like new meta concepts, you know, so whatever seems OP for the first 3 weeks, maybe you don't even patch that, but suddenly by week 6, there's a counter to that. You know, there's a lot of organic things can happen. The problem I have with that is, though, as a purist, I'd be with, because Loco's expressed a similar idea in the past, I'd be with him on it as a purist. The reason I wouldn't, though, is because, again, if you want to go back to the business angle and the idea of what is the casual viewer experiencing when he plays the game versus what he sees on the LCS broadcast, I can tell you the game that shows that this isn't a great approach, which is Overwatch. Because in Overwatch, the game that you see on the Overwatch League is many patches sometimes behind the game that is live right now. And so famously, you had a scenario where all the contenders teams last year were playing part of the meta that's the meta this year. So that makes for a very weird experience, because how can you be playing the game publicly and then the game you're going and seeing on the screen is totally different in terms of like what character they use, what the meta's like, interactions. And so the problem there is it's going to be real hard to marry those two. I don't even know if you could do it personally.
Right, and for what it's worth, I think Riot in our strategy does try to balance that a little bit. Like one thing we do get an opportunity to see that develop more. We do that with Worlds. We get like a Worlds meta that typically allows it to. Sorry, I think there's an ambulance going by.
It's okay.
It's all right.
Sorry, probably because I said a bad word.
It's on its way to pick up Loco at the end of the thing. I called it up 2 hours ago, so there's a Riot employer. It's going to be a fucking bloodbath. Just get over there. Bring the defibrillator, bring the Thorazine, everything. Nothing's off limits here.
But I think we see this with Worlds patch, and Worlds patch is one of our longest times where we get to see the meta played out a bit more. For what it's worth, I'm not actually opposed to seeing something like that, to seeing pro play played on like a longer patch, partly because I remember coming from StarCraft 2, Blizzard, you know, I don't either intentionally or unintentionally just didn't really, you know, did not regularly balance StarCraft 2. But we saw some cool things come out of tournaments, right? Do you guys remember it was so crazy. People slept on it, and then all of a sudden at one of the MLGs, they brought out Blue Flame Hellions. Do you guys remember that? And that was fucking nutty. And everyone was like, all the Korean Terrans were doing it. And immediately people had to go and practice the Blue Flame Hellion builds. All the foreigners were trying to like keep up with it. And it was fucking nutty. Blizzard eventually had to nerf it, but it was like that existed as something you could do in the game that no one knew about. And then because some people were just theory crafting.
It needed time for someone to find it, basically. Yeah.
Exactly. And honestly, that was kind of cool. So
this actually happens in every game. Like for people who don't know, basically what Loco's arguing in favor of comes from StarCraft 1, because the first StarCraft, like Blizzard as a game, had finished it completely being patched basically when it began as a massive esport in Korea, and it had like 10 years where it literally didn't have a patch. And so in that time period, someone who doesn't follow old school games will think, holy shit, no patches in 10 years. Must have been a terrible game, right? But actually it wasn't. Now, to be fair, it was a very unique case. Like I don't know if I've ever seen a game that had as much depth as this one did. And so the key thing is, over time, you had not only meta switches, but sometimes radical meta switches. Like one of the most famous of all time was that the matchup between Zerg and Protoss was insanely biased for Zerg until it literally flipped 180 and became Protoss favored for about a year afterwards. So even though nothing changed in the game, no one buffed anything, no one nerfed anything, no one took a character, a unit out, no one put a unit in. So the point here is, not only are there other things that can be found, but only if you've got time to work through it. But there are actually even sleeper OP shit that you don't know is there. We actually had this happen in Counter-Strike where, believe it or not, one of the guns in the game, it was an SMG, it was actually the UMP. No one knew how OP this gun was in terms of efficiency. It's very cheap. It did like armor pen. It was like a pretty good gun that you could buy on the second round if you want, but you could still keep if you wanted to gamble on the fourth. Like all these aspects. it already existed in the game and just no one had bothered using it. Like, we all used the other guns. It was maybe another gun was better that we all. So we actually all, by going for the easy option, what we immediately knew was good, we're missing actually the depth of the game. We never got to explore, except we did, because in Counter-Strike you also don't massively update the game. So the problem here is, like I said, Loco, I don't know competitively how you can balance it with the casual side, that you're going to have a real hard time there. I'm in favor of it generally for the same reason you outlined, is that you give people more time to work with the patch, to explore these aspects, to have an internal meta, like he says about Worlds, where it'd be like that for a split, Well, we were the best in the first few weeks, but then people found a counter style that killed you.
Generally, Riot has been doing that, where all the big patches come during certain periods of time, and like during season, Riot leaves it alone, and they make it very clear to the teams, hey, 9.8 MSI patch, we're going to kill some of the outliers from the top and buff a little, but we are not going to do big overall changes. And the Scuttle patch change came in 9.9, not 9.8 for that exact reason. So I think generally Riot has been better about that ever since like the whole Juggernaut fiasco.
Yeah, and I think there's, I'd like to see if we could actually do that middle ground, or like do a good version where it's like we're still doing balance changes, like more minor stuff, but it allows for some of those sleeper things. I mean, arguably the idea that Sona Terra came up and was like a strategy that all of a sudden people pulled out in playoffs was something that was one of those sleeper OPs. And we've seen this happen before, where I think there is a world where if we're not doing big systemic changes to the game, but just minor champion balances, we're like, hey, these champions at the very top, we might clip their wings a little. At the bottom, we might give low buffs, but generally things are the same. That gives players more time to experiment around with other stuff. And then when we do the big disruptive patches like preseason, I think that's where we can then like actually shake up the meta, as it were. But I agree that like one of the coolest things about Worlds for me is watching Worlds meta develop. What was the other one that was sweet? Was it was support? Wasn't it support Ashe?
Support
Misfortune.
Support Misfortune. That's yes, right. As a counter pick to Zyra. And that was really, and like that was like one of those things where because we gave people enough time to let that play out, they thought of that and were able to play that and test that out. So that was cool. So I think there's some balance in there. And yeah, for obvious reasons, for like business reasons, I don't think we can go the route of
just play the whole year on one patch, sure.
Yeah, but that being said, I after seeing what occurred with Fortnite and the responses from their streamers and their pro players, I do really want us to be aware of that. One thing I even talked to Loco about, I mean, Reggie's in the chat too, so also relevant for him, is when we think about the big changes we have for the game in season 10.
He's just a guy. By the way, just for everyone who's aware, when he's just in a chat there, he's just another pleb in the chat. Like, he's not on the show. He's not. We have no interaction. Like, don't stop reading it. Who gives a fuck what he has to say? If he wants to talk, come on the show. Anyway, continue. Right, stop talking about random plebs that just happen to be millionaires.
Yeah, sorry, Reggie, fucking pleb. But ideally, we would be able to like bring in the. I want to see us to communicate more with the players and be like, hey, like in season 10, these are the kind of systemic changes we're looking at the game. These are the reasons why we're doing them, and to have that dialogue with pros. I think it went over really well when we did that for when we did the whole changes to runes, right? We were able to actually run that through with the North American pros, with the Korean pros. We were able to actually like get their feedback on it, as well as like basically unveil what we're doing with it. So
by the way, as a general trend, one thing I would like to bring up, again, I don't know what can be done about this. It's kind of hard to figure out. But like, let me think how to explain this. I think I've lost my point, actually. You go for a while, Loco. I'm trying to think. I have a key point I want to make before we end the episode.
So
I think,
Loco, what's your next topic?
What's our next topic? Do you want to talk about the whole regional difference? Because that's something we also wanted to mention.
Oh, yeah. I've talked to Loco about this, Thorn. I'm curious on your thoughts.
Oh, as a quick aside, I've just remembered it anyway. This is the general point I want to make. Is right. I'll set at the outset one aspect that I have actually never blamed Riot Games for with how they've developed the game is clearly the casual game is their bread and butter. It makes the vast majority of the income. It is the game obviously being alive in and of itself is its own purpose to be alive. It's not just to have esports and be a really cool game for Bjergsen to play and be really fair for him to play against Jensen. That's not the main motivation Riot has, or indeed probably should have when balancing the game. But I do feel as though the approach they've had, which is it feels like a lot of buffs and nerfs are very strongly done. And I've always cynically just taken that to be like, well, that's how you make a turnover of champions that are viable. And that's how you keep the game fun for plebs, and you keep it so that people buy new skins and people have to have the old champion because, would we work some champion that wasn't played before and he comes back in the meta? That's all great for business. My problem with that is from a pro perspective, if you're going to patch, I'd much rather it was like super gradual. Like if you think, for example, I'll give you a great example. When Aatrox was super OP around Worlds last year, if you want to balance that, in my opinion, you balance it like literally incremental. Like you do a patch after where whatever you think like the slightly overpowered ability he had was, it doesn't go down 30, it goes down 5. And then you see how that plays out for 2 weeks. Like I would rather that sort of patching, because first of all, it would actually to some degree achieve what we're talking about with Loco here. Like you could still find a lot of new shit that no one got to yet. You could also, if you're very, very good, that would even be a cool aspect, I think. Like, for example, if the Shy is just the best Aatrox player in the world, maybe he's the last one still playing it after all the gradual nerfs come in. Meanwhile, you see some guy who was only playing it because it was OP, and he gets knocked out, I don't know, 3 weeks in when it becomes slightly not good enough for him to be OP. So I would go along those lines. Yeah, go on, Loco. If you're laughing at chat right now, by the way, you're booted off your own.
No,
shit.
I'm talking about Bwipo. Bwipo, what if Bwipo's the only one still playing, what if it Aatrox?
That's true. That's true.
I agree. I agree with that, but I would tweak it a little, partly because of like, I don't even know if this is so much business interest as it is like kind of the optics on just always just slightly nerfing a champion patch after patch, because we kind of did that actually with Aatrox and with Akali. Akali was the better example of like where we just kept slightly nerfing her. I like your approach, except the approach that I think we would want to take is nerf hard, buff small. So basically, if a champion is just so overtuned in pro play that it's just 100% pick back, I think also for the players of that champion, it's really hard to deal with constantly getting nerfs after nerfs. I think it's better if we pull a band-aid off, nerf them hard, and then after we've kind of like not gutted them, but yeah, sometimes gutted them, then we do the small buff. That I like the incrementality on the buffing side. For nerfing, I'd rather pull the ban. That's the only adjustment I'd make.
Doesn't it leave a terrible experience for the player that was like playing that champion for there to be really harsh instead of it being gradual?
I just love the way Loco, he's always thinking from like the one person's perspective. He's like, but I like playing Aurelia, now it's not as good, so does that make my experience of being an Aurelia player worse? It's like, it does, Loco, but that everyone doesn't just get to have fun all the time. It's like I'm having to teach you about that. I'm like your fucking like surrogate dad who just came along and I was like, this fucking guy's just gonna be on drugs dead in a year, so I'll take him into my fucking talk show for wayward boys and fucking bring this guy up right. Like, Loco, not everything can be about you and just being fun all the time, son. You gotta work hard if you want to make it. After all, why is that pretty girl gonna talk to you then? You're like, fucking hell. Anyway, come on, Blastoise, where we going on this?
No, I think it's exactly the point. Like, it's probably gonna feel, it probably feels better for all the people who are playing against Akali. So it's like you have to make that trade-off.
Listen, Loco, I am your father. Search your feelings. You know it to be true.
So the other thing we're going to discuss is now how various regions actually think about the game and think about different. One of the things, I mean, we're all
in China. They think in Chinese.
Oh my god!
Yeah. Any other examples anyone wants to present to the class?
No. This is actually great because China's obviously the one I'm gonna jump to.
Closer to the mic. Closer to the mic.
Oh, sorry. My bad. So China plays it very different in ways that are actually pretty shocking to me. And this was something that we uncovered this year. We were looking, there was like Reddit threads out there. There's too much damage in the game. Damage is too high. We're dying too much. And I was like, okay, I'm going to look into that. I'm going to see how we can look into this. So I fielded surveys in North America, China, Korea, Brazil. And just trying to hit like a smattering of big regions. I'm sorry about Europe. The reason why, and every time I do this, all the European people are so upset. Imagine that I get to field a survey in China, like our largest region. And guess what? I only have to field it in one language, Chinese. As soon as
people do think in Chinese.
As soon as I have to do it in Europe, I have to do it in fucking God knows how many languages. And in general,
wait, they all speak. Wait, I thought like the majority of people in Europe still speak English.
This is where he's pulling off the word. What's great there is I thought Loco was just going to push the envelope and try and be silly, but I thought they all speak English, like trolling. But I actually realized when he said that he was actually being genuine, like he really.
As a second language, is English the most common second language in Europe?
But they're not also speaking.
It is, but they're not. They're not going to type it in game as well, are they? Like if two Spanish people are, they're going to type in Spanish, aren't they?
I mean, they could. Okay, go ahead. Sorry.
And it's also difficult because it's one thing if they're like reading. It's different because they're also reading and they're also like reading things that we're expecting some degree of proficiency. That's like, it's not just like reading a sign, right? So, anyways, long story short, we found that, North American sentiment on the survey largely matched with Reddit, right? Like majority of players, like there's too much damage in the game. Meanwhile, China and Korea were way closer to each other. China was it was a dead split of like, the survey. I couldn't have like doctored the survey better because it was literally like 25% thought there was too little damage, 25% thought there was too much damage, 50% thought it was just right, and it was just perfect distribution, right? Mm-hmm. And again, that's like it's a larger scale. I'm just breaking it into the bigger categories, but the way in which Chinese players are thinking about the game, are playing the game is fundamentally different than North America. And we see this with champion selection rates. We see this with champion ban rates. So it's not just surveys, it's also behavioral data that shows this as well. And this is when I've always talked to players about this, the spiciness of like Yasuo, right? All the North American players hate Yasuo, say he's super frustrating. Whereas in China, he's played so like the way they think about frustrating champions is different than in North America. So that actually is a new challenge for us. We've talked about, and this is maybe something for you guys to chew on and think about for the future. Is like we've always talked about how does Riot, Valve, Blizzard, how do they think about the game from like the high elo to low elo to casual players? That everyone knows about that balance. Those conversations have kind of been played out a little. The next conversation I think is like, what about like how different regions are playing the game, not only at the professional level, but also at the casual level as well. And how does that impact the game? Because I think it's a really tough issue for us. Like I can't have can I have a Chinese version of League and then a version of League? Like that, I don't think that's
one thing you're basically getting at here, which is another major problem that a game like League of Legends will always have, because again, to tie it back in, League is simultaneously trying to be a big casual game like Fortnite, but a competitive game like Counter-Strike. It's trying to marry both worlds or exist with one foot in each. And so one problem it will always have as a game, I can tell you, any game which involves balancing always has this problem, is that you will have certain heroes, characters, champions, which, because part of what allows them to be overpowered is very difficult to execute, those champions nearly always end up in the following state. They have like a 40% win rate in solo queue or worse because they require skill to do all the really good stuff, but yet they are still broken in actual pro play. And unfortunately, in that scenario, think it logically through. How can you fix that? Because if you make it stronger so that the pleb can use it, now it's impossible in a pro player. It's just way too good. If you nerf it even more for the pro, now nobody can use it whatsoever in the game. If it was already at 40% win rate, now it's going to be like 10% win rate. And hence why, actually, when you talk about nerfing things, the one area I would actually agree with you on that aspect of like maybe there's something to the idea you should nerf heavily and then see if you need to incrementally add in things, is some of the champions in the game which have basically always been relevant have been mega nerfed. Lee Sin, Thresh, these things are so amazing in terms of utility that what we learned eventually was you didn't barely even needed any stats on them. You just needed that utility to be in the game, and they could be used at some sort of pro level for certain reasons. So that's another one where I'm not claiming to have the answer. I think it's actually an almost impossible one to answer because you're gonna have to favor someone in that setting.
Yo, Blau,
is it the guy who's the pleb? Is it the pro?
Also, isn't regional difference good for the game? Doesn't that mean there's enough expression that everyone is not arriving at the same conclusion?
It means there are still champions for LCS players to be able to play as well, yes.
Mm-hmm. I know, I mean, what is it? Regional difference. Like in China, like maybe a certain champion X is really popular. In America, maybe champion Y is really popular. It means there's enough avenues of expression where people are prioritizing different things.
Yeah, I think, again, it's a double-edged sword. It's both difficult for us to think about and North America's all like, hey, like, why don't you guys nerf Riven? And we're like, well, win rate on colonies is low, so we're not going to nerf her. It does become an issue when one region feels really strongly about something and other regions don't. That's where it is an issue. But overall, I think it's better for our game if there are certain champions, certain play styles that resonate more in one region than in another. And that just says that, okay, the game speaks to a global audience. And that can be a good thing, right? Like, and to something that Thorin had said, I think there's also, there are varying degrees of successful sports that have varying global audiences, right? You can, like, I personally think, this is weird. I think League is one of the best esports. I actually personally think CSGO is as well. And I know CSGO will probably not have the audience League does. And I think that's okay. I think you can have certain games that are incredible esports or incredible sports that don't have a global appeal, that have that really spiky niche appeal for that group of audience, and that's their best state. That is when
I'd
they
probably
are
give
best.
the better example for that one's probably StarCraft, because StarCraft 2 still exists, and it obviously has its own fans, but it's never going to have the same fans as League or Fortnite. Yeah, sure.
Yeah, because CSGO is not actually great. Because to my point earlier, CSGO, even if not as many people play, I think CSGO is an amazing broadcast experience. But yeah, StarCraft being a great example of, like, it has that niche audience, and that might be its best state. I think the global resonance of certain champions, of certain playstyles, is good for Riot. But again, just as having a huge casual base and a deep esports base is also good for us, it also creates all sorts of challenges that we have to deal with as well.
I just can't look seriously at Loco's face when you're talking. It's like the whole time he's like that kid in school, right? Who's just like, if I just keep my head down and don't say anything, she might not call on me in class.
What?
And it's just like,
oh my god! I look at chat, I get flamed. I say something, I get flamed. I just sit down and listen, and I get flamed. What the fuck do you want me to do?
That's the whole point of the show. You sit down and listen and get flamed. Welcome to Listen Local. This was episode 52. Hope you all enjoyed it. That's our 2 hours up. Now get fucking Charizard out of here and let's go.